President signed one presidential memorandum. There were no revocations. This week saw 23 filed or updated. The key theme emerging from the executive actions is national security and foreign policy, specifically concerning Iran and Israel. The Department of Defense is the primary department affected by the presidential memorandum. On June 23, 2025, President Donald J. Trump authorized a precision strike against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities due to its nuclear weapons development program. The action, reported to Congress under the War Powers Resolution, was intended to be limited in scope, minimizing casualties, deterring future attacks, while protecting U.S. national interests and supporting the self-defense of Israel. Now let's turn to the litigation updates. In Abrego Garcia versus Noam, Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia and his family sued government officials, alleging his deportation to El Salvador without judicial proceedings violated the Administrative Procedure Act, the Withholding of Removal Statute, and the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. No updates were found this week. In Casa versus Donald Trump, Casa, an asylum seeker advocacy project, along with pregnant non-citizens, sued President Donald Trump, alleging that Executive Order 14,160, which ends birthright citizenship, is unconstitutional. A federal court has temporarily blocked the executive order while the lawsuit is pending. No updates were found this week. In DVD versus U.S. Department of Homeland Security, a group of non-citizens sued the Department of Homeland Security, challenging its practice of deporting non-citizens to a third country without providing them notice or opportunity to contest. On June 23rd, the Supreme Court stopped a lower court's order which has prevented the administration from removing immigrants to third countries without an opportunity to present their claims of potential torture first. Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson dissented. In AFL-CIO versus Department of Labor, a coalition of labor unions sued the Department of Labor, the Department of Government Efficiency, and others, seeking to block the Department of Government Efficiency's access to internal Department of Labor information systems. A federal court denied requests to temporarily block the Department of Government Efficiency's access. No updates were found this week. In U.S. Institute of Peace versus Jackson, the United States Institute of Peace and several of its board members filed suit against several officials and entities within the federal government. No updates were found this week. In American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO versus Trump, several unions sued federal agencies to challenge an executive order terminating the employees' collective bargaining protections and the implementation of the executive order. The district court has blocked the federal agencies from implementing the executive order against the unions and their employees. No updates were found this week. In Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Kennedy, a coalition of 16 states filed suit against the National Institutes of Health, challenging the National Institutes of Health's delays in reviewing National Institutes of Health grant applications and the termination of hundreds of already issued grants. No updates were found this week. In Northern Alaska Environmental Center versus Trump, a group of environmental organizations challenged President Donald Trump's Executive Order 14,148 that attempted to reverse former President Joe Biden's withdrawal of certain offshore areas from oil and gas leasing. No updates were found this week. In President and Fellows of Harvard College versus Department of Homeland Security, Harvard University sued the Department of Homeland Security, challenging the revocation of Harvard's Student and Exchange Visitor Program. Harvard alleges that the revocation was a retaliatory campaign by the Trump administration on academic freedom at Harvard. No updates were found this week. In National Job Corps Association versus Department of Labor, a number of Department of Labor contractors and a current Job Corps student have sued the Department of Labor for taking steps to eliminate the Job Corps program. No updates were found this week. In Thakur versus Trump, litigation was brought by faculty members and researchers from the University of California, challenging the termination of federal research grants across multiple agencies. No updates were found this week. In American Association of Physics Teachers versus National Science Foundation, organizations representing professors, researchers, and graduate students filed suit, alleging that the defendants violated the Constitution and Administrative Procedure Act. No updates were found this week. In Melgar Salmeron versus Bondi, on June 24th, the Second Circuit ruled that the government must facilitate the petitioner's return from El Salvador. In State of New Jersey versus U.S. Office of Management and Budget, a coalition of 21 states filed suit against the administration for allegedly terminating billions of dollars worth of grants previously awarded to these states for critical funding. No updates were found this week. In National Fair Housing Alliance versus Department of Housing and Urban Development, the National Fair Housing Alliance and Tennessee Fair Housing Council filed a class action complaint against the Department of Housing and Urban Development, challenging the administration's refusal to release congressionally appropriated grants under the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Fair Housing Initiatives program. No updates were found this week. In State of Washington versus Department of Transport et al., 16 states and the District of Columbia are suing to stop the Trump administration's effort to block federal funds related to electric vehicle infrastructure that Congress already approved. No updates were found this week. In Media Matters for America versus Federal Trade Commission, Media Matters filed suit against the Federal Trade Commission and several of its commissioners, alleging that the agency's recent investigatory actions amount to unlawful retaliation in violation of the First Amendment. No updates were found this week. In Valuta Corporation, Incorporated versus Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, Judge Skydlauer issued a temporary restraining order barring the administration's enforcement of a new geographic targeting order imposing heightened financial reporting requirements on businesses in select zip codes near the U.S.-Mexico border. The court found that the order likely violates the Administrative Procedure Act. No updates were found this week. In American Oversight versus U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, American Oversight filed a complaint under the Freedom of Information Act, seeking to compel Immigration and Customs Enforcement to disclose communications, training materials, and directives between the agency and local law enforcement. No updates were found this week. In Friends of the Everglades, Incorporated versus NOAM, Friends of the Everglades and Center for Biological Diversity filed a complaint seeking to block the construction of a mass federal detention facility at the Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport. No updates were found this week. In Appalachian Voices versus United States Environmental Protection Agency, Appalachian Voices and various organizations filed a class action complaint against the Environmental Protection Agency, challenging its termination of the Environmental and Climate Justice Block Grant Program. No updates were found this week. For full details on these developments, please refer to the 47 POTUS app. This summary was created by 47 POTUS and narrated by an automated voice.